I have one for you. How do you tell students to translate caipira?
Hey, what's up, guys? Foster here. Just a quick note before we get started today. This week, we are having conversations with another English teacher, Christina Lorimer. Christina is simply one of the smartest, most interesting, and thoughtful teachers that I have met in a long, long time. And I think you will really enjoy these conversations as much as I did. So, after a quick word from our sponsors, we will get on with the show.
Hey, hey, everyone! Bom, estou aqui para falar sobre o nosso querido Cambly. Para quem está começando hoje esse podcast, bem-vindo, e nós temos uma novidade para você. Você que sempre procurou uma plataforma online de inglês para ter aquela conversa muito legal com algum falante nativo de inglês, chegou a sua hora. O Cambly é uma plataforma de inglês online maravilhosa. Você vai lá no cambly.com ou no aplicativo do Cambly e você pode filtrar de acordo com as suas necessidades. Então, digamos que você está procurando alguém para te ensinar mais gramática ou ter alguma melhora no vocabulário sobre botânica. Qualquer coisa desse gênero e super específica, o Cambly pode te dar. Uma das coisas mais legais é que tem professor quase 24 horas por dia. Então, se você precisa se preparar, por exemplo, para uma reunião, para uma apresentação ou coisa parecida e quer treinar naquele dia, um pouco antes ou um dia antes, você entra na plataforma, escolhe um professor e começa a falar. Lembrando que não adianta saber inglês se você não consegue falar. O Cambly tá aí para isso. Então, para você ganhar uma aula de inglês de graça com o Cambly, é só colocar o nosso cupom Inglês no Icru Podcast. Mais uma vez, Inglês no Icru Podcast. Vai lá no cambly.com ou no aplicativo do Cambly e coloca nosso cupom Inglês no Icru Podcast. Now, on with the show.
No, I can't say that before that I had actually spoken in Portuguese ever. That was really my first go at it.
But you spoke Spanish before, right?
Oh yeah. And that's where it gets really interesting actually because I by that point in my life I was so fluent in Spanish. I was I had lived in Spain for a year, I had lived in Costa Rica for 2 years, I had been to Ecuador, Peru. I had worked in restaurants for 10 years. At that
California.
time, I'm Californian. At that time, I was working in an all Spanish speaking nonprofit. So all my staff meetings were in Spanish. And I believe I was dating only people who spoke Spanish.
hmm
It's just like what
Exclusively date Hispanic.
exclusively. Do you speak Spanish? No? Okay, forget it. And Foster, when I went, I sandwiched the Brazil trip and a Costa Rica trip because I was still really close with people there. And so I went San Francisco to San Jose, Costa Rica, to Brazil, back to Costa Rica, and back to the States. And Costa Rica, my Spanish is fine. I'm my Costa Rican Christina self, talking to everybody.
Right. Pura
eh,
vida. Yeah.
Super pura vida. I come back after being in Brazil for 2 months, and it was my Spanish was impacted
Yeah.
negatively.
I had the same same thing. Yeah, for sure.
And these community members that I was like, and these families and all these friends that I had, they were like, "What happened to you?" This like,
Yeah.
because I was speaking Spanish, but it was all with this now like different intonation and this different stress. And they were like, "Dude, I don't know what's going on, but you were gone for a second, and suddenly your Spanish is bad." I was like, "Oh shit."
Yeah.
So,
All my friends in Spain, I remember I spent my first 6 months in Brazil. And when I was catching up with my Spanish friends, I think they literally thought I had a stroke or something because
yeah,
I was just not speaking their language or any intelligible language at the time.
I was shocked.
Yeah,
I
it's
was
weird.
as shocked as they were, if not more, because again, like if I can explain to you how fluent in Spanish I was, I would have never in my life thought that I would be at a place, I don't know, 5 years later now or something, where I wouldn't be able to firmly hold my own in a Spanish conversation. If I have a Cuban in front of me and I have a Brazilian in front of me, I would have thought it would have been way easier to just go back and forth.
Yeah. Do you still struggle with that today?
Yeah. I don't speak Spanish ever.
Yeah. I'm
I
pretty
just don't.
much the same way. Um, yeah, this is difficult because a lot of students ask questions about this, like, if I learn English, will I lose my German or something like that? Spanish and Portuguese, obviously, very closely related. So Alexia and I we traveled all through South America last year to
Yeah.
Argentina, Uruguay, and Chile.
Awesome.
And for the first like 4 or 5 days, I was just speaking Portuguese to
Yeah.
everyone. But then once I got into it, it started coming back really quick,
Yeah.
definitely with like some problems. It wasn't back to my normal level when I was living in Spain. But the interesting thing was my Portuguese never changed at all. So my Portuguese is constant, and now my Spanish fluctuates. It's very strange.
I'm sure it's still in there somewhere. I
Definitely.
I I have to believe that if I, like you said, like if I moved to back to Costa Rica or Argentina or wherever, even back to California, that it would come back pretty quickly.
Definitely.
But this is what we know about language. I mean, really, unless you grow up bilingual, then if you don't use it, you're gonna lose it. So I'm just, quite frankly, it's been about, yeah, 5 or 6 years now that every context that I would have spoken Spanish in has now been replaced by Portuguese. So
Yeah.
whether that's work or love or life instances and travels, I just hardly ever speak to anybody in Spanish anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. You're speaking my language,
Yeah.
English in this case, but it could be Portuguese, but definitely not Spanish.
Yeah. There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. So you spent, I think you said 2 months in Salvador, and then you returned back to Costa Rica, and then you went back to Brazil. Is that it?
No, but that was close. I so it was summer, right? Before my last year of my master's. So 2010, I went to Salvador da Bahia for 2 months. Stopped in Costa Rica on the way back, and I finished out my master's. Now, in the last year of my master's, I was sort of getting burnt out. We're just I love how burnout comes up so frequently in my story.
No.
Um, on nonprofit life. And I sort of thought, can I do this for the long haul? Am I going to stay in San Francisco and work in nonprofits forever? And, my answer was no. Not because of the nonprofits, but because of me. I have what one might call in English compassion fatigue. So I get this is
Real thing.
it's a real thing. It's an actual term from social workers. Like this is from the field of social work.
I
And
know it sounds like the most like first world problem, but it's a real thing. Yeah.
yeah, and I was so happy to know that it was a real thing because I was really suffering from it. And I get really involved in people's lives, and that's for better and that's for worse. And I really, really care, again, for better or for worse. So the nonprofits I was working at were not light. I mean, I was working at mostly domestic abuse shelters with,
Wow.
again, Latina immigrants and refugees. And I was developing materials and curriculum for the California Diabetes Project, where health and English literacy intersected.
Wow.
So this might sort of sound a little complicated, but I would do things like go to day laborer centers and round up all the folks who are standing on the corner waiting for work. And if they didn't get a job that day, I would bring them into the day labor center and I would teach them English, but we would be learning about STDs or
Yeah.
diabetes. And or I would go to the domestic abuse shelter, and the women who were there on that day, we would talk about you know uh, a lot of what we worked on was self-defense stuff. So it was really intense.
Wow.
And
That is some heavy, heavy shit. Yeah.
yeah, and while incredibly fulfilling, so much so that of course still today I'm like, what am I doing with my life? Because I'm not like saving, terrible word, helping, also not good, supporting,
Yeah. Contributing.
contributing, empowering, etc. Although I know I am in other ways. However, last year of my master's, it clicked for me that that wasn't the best place for my own personal well-being and health. So I applied for a Fulbright grant. And for anyone who's listening, the Fulbright is a fellowship, scholarship, basically through the Department of State in the
Right.
United States.
I think some of our listeners might be familiar.
Oh, yeah, we're not talking to Brazilians.
We are talking to
Oh, we are
Brazilians.
talking to Brazilians.
No, I was saying because I think I mentioned it on the program before, just in
Mm.
the context that I also applied for a Fulbright and was not accepted to a
Uh,
Fulbright,
yeah.
which means Christina is very, very smart.
um, so it's a really big program in the States. It's pretty prestigious. And I thought I would go for it. And the cool thing is that I applied for a Fulbright in Brazil because I thought that was a happy time in my life. What if
Mhm.
I go back there? Um, I ended up getting it, and I ended up being placed in the interior of Sao Paulo. So
Yeah.
this is 2012. This is now the second time that I went back to Brazil, or what I thought was like, I couldn't believe that was Brazil. Because remember, I thought everywhere was like Salvador da Bahia.
Yeah.
And so it was amazing. I did my Fulbright for 9 months. I got my grant extended by the university I was at. So I stayed another 6 months. And my Portuguese got pretty good and got very caipira. And
What city were you in?
São José do Rio Preto.
So many São José's in São Paulo.
There are. Yep.
Can I ask you a quick language question, real quick?
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you translate when students say, like, oh, I'm from the interior de São Paulo? How would you translate that?
Yeah. I have said before the interior, although it's not, that's very au pé da letra, right?
Yeah,
I would either say the countryside
what I normally go with.
or rural. However, that gets complicated because São José do Rio Preto has 500,000 people. Like it's a medium-sized city.
Right,
So it's
right.
not rural, it's not countryside, but it's just sort of like in the middle, you know? So I would just like how would I say the Midwest in the States? I might say like it's in the
Precisely.
middle of the country.
Yeah, yeah. If you're from like Kansas City or something. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's interesting. I just say countryside as well, but I've never found a perfect translation for that. And rural is such a difficult word for
Yeah.
even English speakers to pronounce.
I have
Yeah.
one for you.
Mhm.
How do you tell students to translate caipira?
Hey guys, thanks so much for listening to another episode of Inglês no Rádio. If you like what we do, if you want to support the show, here's what you can do. Leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Android, wherever you listen to the podcast. It really helps other people discover the show. And you can sign up for our VIP newsletter. So each time we release new courses early discounts for Sound School, new worksheets, special discounts. The people on our newsletter are the first to know. So if you are interested in the things we are doing, go to inglesnuecru.com and sign up. And as always, keep up the good fight and lose well. Até já.